God as the worst engineer, therefore, he doesn't exist. Introduction: the criteria of intelligent design. What is intelligent design? Intelligent design is the idea that complex biological structures could not have arisen from blind natural processes and therefore must have been designed by some intelligent being. Proponents of this concept argue that living organisms show signs of purposeful design, functionality, optimality, and expediency. Supporters of intelligent design often contrast it with the theory of evolution, calling the latter incomplete or unable to explain the complexity of life. They emphasize the existence of irreducible complexity, structures allegedly unable to function if even one part is removed. Examples such as the eye, the cellular flagellum, or the blood clotting system are used as arguments in favor of a designer. However, the scientific community rejects intelligent design as an unscientific concept that lacks predictive power and is not based on empirical evidence. Unlike the theory of evolution, intelligent design does not offer a mechanism of change and cannot explain the many poorly designed elements found in living organisms. Expectations of a divine designer. If we assume that living beings were designed by a divine entity, omniscient, omnipotent, and perfect, it is logical to expect that their structure would be optimal, flawless, logical, and functionally elegant. This assumption underlies the idea of intelligent design. God cannot make mistakes, and his creations must be impeccable. But in reality, we encounter biological solutions that resemble patches, compromises, and the result of blind historical inheritance more than the work of a perfect engineer. If design truly happened top-down, from plan to implementation, then why are there so many examples of crooked and inefficient designs in nature? Expectations of a divine designer include absence of unnecessary, non-functional, or harmful organs, optimal pathways for nerves, vessels, and other structures, maximal energy efficiency of biological processes, harmony between anatomy and the organism's functions. Yet living organisms do not possess these qualities. This points not to design, but to gradual accumulation of changes without a global plan. Why good design is key to belief in a creator. Faith in a creator God rests, among other things, on the idea of the world as a harmonious and rationally arranged mechanism. This was the argument of William Paley, who compared a living being to a watch. Since a watch is complex and well-coordinated, it must have a watchmaker. Similarly, he argued, the complexity of the eye indicates a creator. This argument only works if we actually see good design. If nature is logical, efficient, and biological structures perform their functions in the best possible way, then traces of intelligence can be inferred. But as soon as we encounter examples of poor, inefficient, or even harmful design, the argument falls apart. If God is a perfect engineer, he cannot allow mistakes. But mistakes are everywhere. Their accumulation calls into question not only the idea of intelligent design, but the existence of a designer altogether. In this context, evolution, which allows imperfection, errors, and patches, appears as a far more realistic and plausible explanation. Good design is the cornerstone of theism, and the absence of such design decisively undermines the hypothesis of divine engineering. Chapter 1. The giraffe's laryngeal nerve, a route without reason. Anatomy of a nerve. 5 meters in the body, 4 meters unnecessary. The giraffe's laryngeal nerve is a classic example of anatomical absurdity. The left recurrent laryngeal nerve, branching from the vagus nerve, first travels downward into the chest cavity, where it loops around the aortic arch, then ascends back up to the larynx. In the giraffe's body, with its long neck, this means the nerve travels about 4 to 5 meters, even though it could be a direct route of only a few centimeters. This extra journey is not functionally necessary, but results from historical legacy. In fish, the ancestors of all terrestrial vertebrates, the heart and larynx were close together, so the nerve's path was short. As vertebrate anatomy evolved, the heart descended while the nerve maintained its old route, looping around the artery, thus being forced to go down first, then up. The result is an anatomically inefficient structure that creates additional risks and energy costs without functional sense. This can be explained by evolutionary history, but is completely inappropriate from the perspective of intelligent design. Why evolution explains it, but intelligent design does not. The theory of evolution perfectly explains the presence of such an irrational nerve path. Evolution is not an engineer planning a system from scratch. It works with what exists, gradually modifying existing structures. It's like modifying old code instead of rewriting a program. Each change is a small adaptation, and the structure can become increasingly crooked if that is beneficial in the short term, or if alternatives cause harm. A rational designer, especially an omnipotent one, would not be bound by such constraints. They could have routed the nerve directly, bypassing the aorta, especially since this concerns the creation of a new organism, not modification of an existing one. If the designer consciously chose such a route, it is either a sign of gross incompetence or a lack of intent to make an efficient, logical design. In any case, the idea of an intelligent and perfect creator fails this test. Examples of similar detours in other animals. The giraffe's laryngeal nerve is not the only case where nature shows inefficient anatomical solutions. Many examples exist in the animal kingdom. The spermatic cord in mammals. Sperm cells exit the testes, then travel a long route upward, looping around the ureter before descending into the urethra. This crossed arrangement has no functional purpose but is inherited from ancestors. The human optic nerve, nerves pass in front of the retina, creating a blind spot. In cephalopods like octopuses, this does not occur. Their nerves run behind the retina, as would be expected from good design. The esophagus and windpipe intersect. This arrangement allows humans to choke on food. A rational designer would have no reason to cross two such critically important channels. The human lumbar spine. It constantly bears loads. It was not designed to handle, causing chronic pain. This is the result of adaptation, not original design. All these examples demonstrate that living organisms carry the imprint of history rather than the trace of a perfect plan. They are products of gradual change, not the work of a superintelligence. Chapter 2. The Human Eye versus the Octopus Eye. The blind spot in the human eye. The human eye is a complex but far from perfect organ. One of the clearest examples of its anatomical inefficiency is the presence of the blind spot, an area on the retina where visual perception is completely absent. This spot corresponds to the point where the optic nerve exits the eye, carrying nerve fibers that connect the eye to the brain. There are no photoreceptors, rods and cones, in the blind spot, so it cannot detect light. Usually, the brain fills in this spot using contextual information from the surrounding image, so people don't notice it, but that doesn't change the fact of its existence. The blind spot is a clear structural compromise that makes no sense from the perspective of intelligent design. If the eye were designed from scratch according to engineering logic, there would be no blind spot at all. It is a defect, a direct consequence of the way the optic nerve passes through the retina. Evolution could only adapt to this limitation, but could not radically eliminate it. Nerves in front, instead of behind, an anatomical absurdity. In humans and all vertebrates, the photoreceptors in the eye lie behind a layer of nerve fibers. This means that light must first pass through a layer of nerve endings, blood vessels, and supportive tissues before reaching the sensitive cells. It's like building a telescope with wiring placed in front of the lens. From an anatomical perspective, this is extremely inefficient. Light is partially scattered, the image is distorted, and the existence of the blind spot only worsens the situation. The eye's structure is a compromise inherited from ancestral forms, with evolution only able to modify the existing scheme rather than flip it around. No rational engineer, given free design choice, would place wiring and supports between the lens and the sensor. But that is exactly how vision works in all vertebrates. This is a significant argument against the hypothesis of a divine, intelligent design. The octopus eye, how the engineer's eye should look. In the depths of the sea lives a creature whose anatomy provides a clear example of how the eye should look if it were designed from scratch. The octopus. Unlike vertebrate eyes, the octopus eye has no blind spot. Its optic nerve connects to the photoreceptors from behind, not in front. Light hits the sensitive cells directly, without any obstruction, and nerve fibers do not interfere with perception. This eye design lacks the anatomical flaws inherent in vertebrates. Moreover, the octopus is not a higher organism. It is an invertebrate mollusk, and its eye evolved independently from the vertebrate eye through convergent evolution. This is especially important. Two different branches of life evolved similar functional organs, but one is efficient and the other is not. If a god created the eye with the task of efficient vision in mind, it would most likely look like the octopus eye. Yet humans have an eye with defects. Evolution explains this. The octopus and humans took different paths, and our path was constrained by vertebrate evolutionary history. The hypothesis of a superintelligent designer, however, cannot explain such differences. Chapter 3: Knees, Backs, and Childbirth. Mistakes we pay for with pain. Bipedalism and chronic pain. The human body is not perfectly adapted to upright walking, one of our key distinguishing traits. Although bipedalism freed the hands for work and tool use, it brought with it a host of anatomical problems. The spine, originally formed for movement on all fours, was forced to bend into an S shape to compensate for the vertical posture. This curvature causes uneven weight distribution and pressure on the intervertebral discs. As a result, we face chronic lower back pain affecting millions of people, herniated discs, nerve compression and inflammation, reduced mobility with age. Knees and feet also suffer. The knee joints must support the body's weight in a configuration unnatural to their original anatomy. This makes them vulnerable to wear, injury, and degenerative diseases like osteoarthritis. Human feet are similarly vulnerable. Flat feet, varicose veins, calluses, heel injuries, and Achilles tendon problems are widespread due to the compromised design required for upright locomotion. This design is an evolutionary adaptation, not the work of a perfect engineer. No one would design a system that causes so much chronic pain if they had freedom of choice and logical design principles. The female pelvis and difficult childbirth. Childbirth in humans is a dangerous and painful process that poses real threats to both mother and child. The cause lies in the conflict between two opposing evolutionary pressures: the development of a large brain in infants, requiring an increase in skull size, the maintenance of a narrow female pelvis, necessary for efficient bipedal walking. This conflict has resulted in a birth canal that is extremely tight and curved. The infant must rotate inside the birth canal to pass through narrow and potentially injurious passages. This makes human childbirth uniquely difficult among mammals. Many animals give birth quickly and with little pain. Women experience intense contractions and pain, risk of tissue tears, danger of bleeding and infections, the necessity for surgical interventions, cesarean sections. If a rational designer had created the female pelvis, this incompatibility between childbirth and bipedalism would have been avoided. Instead, we see a poor compromise explained only by gradual, uncoordinated changes through evolution. Why a perfect being would not have designed it this way? If humans were created by a perfect being, a god, the body should be logical, functionally optimal, and free of chronic suffering. But everything points to the opposite. The human body is the result of biological compromises that carry traces of incompatibility between old structures and new functions. No experienced engineer would design a spine that is constantly overloaded and prone to wear, birth canals that threaten life, knees that quickly degrade under normal load. We suffer not because humans behave poorly or have fallen from grace, as some theologians claim, but because the body is constructed like a poorly adapted machine. This is the result not of design, but of evolutionary layering of new functions on an old framework. All this points to the absence of intelligent design. Our body was not created, but emerged and evolved with many flaws and limitations that a god, if such existed, simply would not allow. Chapter 4: Genetic Junk. 98% of useless code. Pseudogenes and repetitive DNA sequences. The human genome consists of about 3 billion base pairs, yet only around 1 to 2% of this information actually codes for proteins. That is, performs a clear functional role. For a long time, the remaining 98% was considered genetic junk. Although some of it plays a role in regulating gene expression, vast regions still appear to have no obvious purpose. Pseudogenes are a prime example. Pseudogenes are DNA segments that once were fully functional genes but lost their function due to mutations. They are inactive, not transcribed and not producing proteins, remaining in the genome as dead copies. They are like pages from an old book inserted into a new one but completely crossed out and unreadable. Humans have thousands of these non-functional ghost genes. Another category of seemingly useless DNA is repetitive sequences, especially lines, signs, and microsatellites. These sequences are duplicated hundreds of thousands of times without any apparent need. They do not contribute to the organism's fitness or survival and serve no beneficial function, just cluttering the genome. From an engineering perspective, the presence of such junk is unacceptable. No rational programmer would insert hundreds of thousands of unused lines of code, especially when they complicate reading, regulation, and increase the risk of errors. Yet this is exactly what we see in the human genome. Viral insertions and damaged duplicates. Another strong argument against the intelligent design hypothesis is that the presence of viral insertions and retroviral sequences embedded in DNA due to infections in our ancestors millions of years ago. These insertions are archival traces of viruses that integrated their genes into the host genome, and some of these viral genes have remained permanently. About 8% of the human genome consists of such endogenous retroviruses. They are no longer active, but their presence is confirmed by molecular traces, many shared with other primates. This provides powerful evidence of our common ancestry with apes, since the viral insertions match not only in composition, but also in location. The genome also contains many damaged duplicates of working genes. Sometimes gene copying produces incomplete or faulty copies, which instead of being removed, persist as molecular junk. The existence of these viral remnants and gene fragments shows that the genome is not an artificially designed system, but an archive of random events accumulated over millions of years. No God designer would insert viral fragments or broken gene duplicates into the sacred code of life. This is direct refutation of intelligent design. What evolution explains and why this challenges the God hypothesis. Evolutionary theory perfectly explains the presence of pseudogenes, repeats, viral insertions, and other junk DNA in the genome. Under natural selection, genes don't need to be perfectly ordered, just good enough to ensure survival and reproduction. If a DNA segment doesn't cause harm, it remains even if useless. Harmful insertions disappear over time, while neutral ones persist without consequences. This is how evolution works. Not a perfectionist, but a blind collector of errors, variations, and compromises. This is what distinguishes it from a perfect engineer. A God with omniscience would not leave junk, copying errors, or ancient viral fragments in the genome. That would be illogical and contradict the idea of intelligent design. Thus, modern genetics does not merely remain neutral regarding religion, it directly contradicts the designer hypothesis. The human genome is not a masterpiece crafted by a skillful architect, but a manuscript rewritten by a blind copyist over millions of years, full of typos, omissions, insertions, and margin notes. Chapter 5. The Recursion of Evolution, Crooked but Comprehensible. Errors as a consequence of gradual adaptations. Evolution does not create from scratch, it modifies what already exists. This is its fundamental difference from intelligent design. Instead of developing a new organ from zero, evolution tweaks an old one. This process is recursive. Every new change builds upon the previous structure, even if that structure was flawed. Thus, an organism is not built according to a blueprint, but rather molded from what's already there. As a result of accumulating small changes, imperfect structures arise that nevertheless function well enough to ensure survival. These poorly designed elements don't appear because nature made a mistake, but because no other options were available within the existing anatomical framework. Examples. The giraffe's neck elongates, but the recurrent laryngeal nerve still follows an ancient winding path. Vertebrate eyes evolve from an inverted retina, so nerves run in front of photoreceptors. The spine is adapted for a horizontal posture, yet humans walk upright, causing frequent back pain. These errors are not failures, but consequences of developmental inertia. Nature cannot rewind and redesign from scratch. It must add patches to pre-existing solutions. No goal, only adaptation. Evolution has no final plan, does not move toward an ideal, and does not pursue a goal. It has no image of a perfect being. Its sole mechanism is natural selection, which preserves variants that improve survival and reproductive success in a given environment. This means that organisms adapt at any moment not to an abstract better, but to concrete conditions here and now. For instance, if a mutation makes a limb slightly more gripping, it persists even if the rest of the body's design is suboptimal. If a nerve pathway works, even crookedly, it stays. The priority is survival and reproduction. There is no evolutionary board meeting deciding, let's reorganize the organism logically. This leads to a local, not global optimum. The result is not the best possible solution overall, but the most workable one currently available. This approach produces many imperfect yet functional structures, distinguishing evolution from engineering. Why bad design is a consequence of natural selection. From the perspective of an intelligent designer, bad design is paradoxical. Why create an organism with defects when perfection is possible? But from evolution's viewpoint, bad design is normal and inevitable. It results from selection constrained by existing structures, random mutations, and historical contingencies. Bad design occurs because changes happen gradually and cannot instantly fix previous solutions. Each adaptation must be viable at every stage. Imperfections persist if they are not critical for survival. Evolution does not see the future. It only responds to the present. Consequently, evolution produces structures that function but are flawed. They are not optimal, elegant, or robust, and are often vulnerable and costly to maintain from a medical perspective. However, if they allow survival and reproduction, they persist. A rational designer could remove flaws, eliminate redundancies, and plan from scratch. Nature cannot. Therefore, the observed examples of bad design in biology are evidence of evolution and a direct refutation of the divine intelligent design hypothesis. Chapter 6: Parasites, Cancer, and Pain. A sadistic God or an immoral nature. Why do children suffer? If we assume the existence of an all-powerful and all-good God, then the suffering of the innocent, especially children, becomes a logical catastrophe for religious worldviews. Children have not yet committed sins, have not broken divine commandments, and have not earned suffering. Yet they get cancer, die from congenital disorders, fall victim to parasitic infections, epilepsy, hunger, and violence. The problem of evil and suffering is an ancient philosophical dilemma. If God wants to stop suffering but cannot, then he is not omnipotent. If he can but does not want to, then he is malevolent. If he can and wants to, but suffering still exists, then either God does not exist or he is not as described by religion. An evolutionary biology perspective. Evolutionary biology explains suffering differently. There is no morality in nature. Organisms are born with mutations and developmental errors by the millions, and natural selection does not guarantee justice or protection. A child's suffering is not a lesson, a test, or a divine plan. It is the result of random processes, biological mistakes, and evolutionary statistics. Biological discomfort as the norm. In the living world, suffering is not an exception but the rule. Most organisms face pain, hunger, parasites, injuries, and fear daily. From a biological perspective, pain and discomfort are information signals, evolutionarily advantageous but subjectively agonizing. They warn the organism of threats and encourage avoidance of danger, but their presence does not imply any higher meaning. Human life is a constant compromise between survival and decay. We suffer from chronic pain, aging and neurodegeneration, autoimmune diseases, infections, mutations, allergies, and cancer. If this were the result of conscious design, it would be inhumane. If it is the result of blind natural selection, everything becomes understandable without invoking morality. Survival is not about comfort, but about sufficient adaptation. Pain is not punishment, but a signal. Suffering is not retribution, but a byproduct of a complex system in which every mechanism evolved without plan or purpose. This removes subjective notions of evil, but makes the phenomena comprehensible. Evolutionary biology explains, theism does not. Evolutionary biology offers a consistent, logical, and testable explanation for suffering. Genetic mutations are random. Organisms develop through complex, error-prone processes. Natural selection preserves traits that promote survival, even if accompanied by suffering. There is no goal in nature to eliminate pain, only to preserve genes. Theism, meanwhile, fails to provide a satisfactory explanation beyond mystical or moral assertions such as, it's a test, it's punishment for sins, or God's ways are inscrutable. Such claims fail critical scrutiny, especially when suffering involves newborns or people with congenital disabilities. They lack logic, compassion, and empirical support. Accepting that suffering is explained by evolution puts everything into perspective. There is no morality in pain, no purpose in mutation, no justice in disease. But there are mechanisms, patterns, and natural causes. It may not be comforting, but it is honest, and above all, explainable. Chapter 7. Why we see no signs of design, only traces of history. Rudiments. Appendix, wisdom teeth, ear muscles. Rudimentary organs are biological structures that have lost their original function or remain only in a vestigial form. They not only fail to perform any useful role, but sometimes even cause problems. If humans were created as intelligent beings from scratch, such useless and troublesome details should not exist in their anatomy. Examples. Appendix. In the past, it served as part of the digestive system of herbivorous ancestors, helping to break down plant fiber. Today, it at best plays a minor role in the immune system, but more often is a source of potentially fatal inflammation. Appendicitis. Wisdom teeth. A remnant from the time when our ancestors had larger jaws that easily accommodated an additional set of molars. Modern humans often find that these teeth do not fit in the jaw, causing pain, inflammation, and requiring surgical removal. Ear muscles, auriculaires. In some animals, they allow active ear movement to capture sounds. In humans, these muscles remain, but in most people, they do not function. Some can wiggle their ears, but this has no practical use. These examples demonstrate not design or engineering, but the legacy of evolutionary history. They are traces of the past that persist because they do not represent a significant evolutionary disadvantage, but are by no means the result of rational engineering. Embryonic stages with tails and gills. The development of the human embryo also points not to divine creation, but to shared stages with other animals, especially vertebrates. At certain stages, the human embryo has a tail similar to the tails of other mammals, forms pharyngeal arches, which develop into gills in fish, but in humans transform into structures of the lower jaw, ear, and neck. These features disappear at later stages, but their very appearance indicates deep phylogenetic connections. If humans were designed from scratch without evolutionary heritage, why pass through stages characteristic of fish or reptiles? The embryo seems to replay the developmental history of its ancestors. This is understandable if we view an organism as the result of mutations and heredity. But it is inexplicable if a human is a separate, uniquely created being unrelated to other life forms. How it fits into the tree of evolution. When we consider rudiments, embryonic stages, viral insertions in DNA, anatomical oddities, and biochemical similarities, all of these fit into a coherent picture of evolutionary kinship. We see not perfect design, but many layers superimposed on one another, like archaeological strata. These layers reflect mutations left uncorrected, old adaptations modified for new conditions, common ancestors from whom we inherited both useful and useless traits. This tree of life is not an engineering blueprint, but a branching network with many intermediate and dead-end branches. This is how the living world is structured when viewed without religious lenses. And the deeper we study anatomy, genetics, and embryology, the clearer it becomes. We are not a product of design, we are a product of history. Chapter 8. Mistakes as evidence of the natural, not the supernatural. If there were an intelligent designer, the world would be different. When we talk about an intelligent designer, especially in a religious context, we imply a being possessing omnipotence, omniscience, and absolute wisdom. It is logical to expect that the result of such a being's work would be flawless, optimal, free from suffering and absurdities. However, the world we live in is far from these expectations. It contains tens of thousands of genetic diseases caused by mutations randomly accumulated in DNA. The human body vulnerable to cancer, aging, infections, and injuries. Many biological and anatomical absurdities that cannot be explained by the logic of an engineer, but are easily understood as consequences of gradual evolution. Imagine a car designed so that its wheels break while driving, the engine overheats because of a weak hood tilt, and the steering wheel is connected to the rear wheels. We would consider the engineer either incompetent or non-existent. Yet many aspects of biology are arranged in a similar way. Therefore, either God is a very poor engineer or there was no such engineer at all. A poor engineer equals not God, but biology. What may seem like bad engineering is in fact the signature of natural selection and blind evolution. Biology does not create perfect solutions. It works with what is available, adapting old structures to new needs. It is like building a bridge out of broken furniture parts. For example, the human knee is vulnerable to injury because it is a modified joint originally designed for movement on four legs. The giraffe's laryngeal nerve descends into the chest, loops around, and goes back up because its ancestors, the fish, had this same circuitous route. The blind spot in the human eye exists because nerves exit through the retina from its inner side. All these flaws make sense if we understand that nature does not design, but gradually modifies what already exists. The problem of imperfection and divine logic. Supporters of intelligent design often respond to the problem of imperfection with the argument, God's ways are mysterious. But this is a refusal of rational analysis. If a divine plan allows any form of suffering, absurdity, and dysfunction, it effectively becomes indistinguishable from their absence. In this case, any deformity can be attributed to a mysterious plan, any suffering to a test of faith, any mistake to divine wisdom beyond our understanding. Such an approach does not explain reality, it evades explanation. It renders the hypothesis of God unfalsifiable and therefore unscientific. Applying the scientific method, we find that all the imperfections we observe are compatible with evolution and contradict the idea of an all-perfect creator. In other words, these flaws are not a weakness of the evolutionary hypothesis, but its direct confirmation. Whereas for theism, this is a fundamental problem. Conclusion? God with a screwdriver can't cope. The body of evidence supporting evolution. When evaluating the origin of complex life forms, it is important to rely on a body of empirical data rather than intuitive feelings. In the case of evolution, this data comes from many independent fields of knowledge. Paleontology reveals gradual transitions between species, including transitional forms such as Archaeopteryx between dinosaurs and birds, or Tiktaalik between fish and terrestrial vertebrates. Genetics uncovers shared DNA segments among all living organisms, the presence of vestigial genes, and precise matches inherited from common ancestors. Anatomy demonstrates homologous structures, the same parts modified for different functions, for example, the limbs of mammals, bat wings, and whale flippers. Embryology shows that all vertebrates pass through similar developmental stages, including tails, laryngeal arches, and other archaic features. Observed mutations and selection. We witness evolution in action, from antibiotic-resistant bacteria to viruses, and from laboratory selection of plants and animals. All these lines of evidence converge at one point. Life has evolved gradually, without the involvement of an external intelligent engineer. Why the belief in a perfect designer does not stand up to analysis. The concept of a divine engineer implies creating life with maximum efficiency, harmony, and purposefulness. But observed biology is full of illogical, irrational, and even harmful solutions. Why is the birth canal placed through a narrow pelvis? Why does the optic nerve pass in front of the photoreceptors, creating a blind spot? Why create a genome that is 98% junk? To maintain faith in a perfect designer, the theist must either ignore facts or admit that this designer is not perfect and therefore does not fit the definition of God. A God who creates imperfection, illogic, and suffering is no longer an all-good and omnipotent God. This is either a poor engineer or a myth replaced by science. Evolution is not a hypothesis, but an observed reality. The scientific approach relies on observation, experimentation, and verification. Unlike religious dogmas, evolution is testable and confirmed. We observe microevolution in real time, for example, changes in gene frequencies in populations. We can predict the effects of selection and test them. We can reconstruct phylogenetic relationships among organisms using DNA and verify them in practice. This makes evolution not a hypothesis in the everyday sense, but a scientific theory, an explanation that has withstood rigorous testing and accounts for many unrelated phenomena within one coherent model. Meanwhile, the hypothesis of intelligent design does not withstand criticism. It fails to explain imperfections, makes no predictions, and is not falsifiable. This makes it not an alternative, but a dead end intellectually. Conclusion. It is clear life did not create God. God is a concept created by life out of its own limitations, fear, and misunderstanding. And now that we understand this, we do not need a God with a screwdriver. We have science with a microscope.